Skill gaps are massively important in video games. They describe the possible difference in ability between the very best players and the very worst. In this video, I'm going to explain how they can be a terrible thing for video games, particularly Call of Duty, and how the game could benefit from a few significant changes. I started thinking about this when I saw this Gears of War clip. It shows a player using something called wall bouncing, a technique that lets you kind of move quickly and unpredictably around, giving you a huge advantage over people that can't do it. Some people in the comments were praising how amazing things like this were in the game, and plenty of other people were saying, oh wow, this is why I don't play Gears of War multiplayer, and I'm definitely in the latter camp. So some games have a huge skill gap, like Counter-Strike for example. The best players will train their aim for hundreds of hours, know the precise timings that enemy players are likely to appear at, like certain peak spots on the map, and deeply understand the recoil pattern for every weapon so they can use them essentially without recoil. All of that, coupled with things like single-shot headshots taking you out of the game, means that a new player just doesn't stand a chance against a seasoned one. Other games, like Mario Kart, go to great lengths to reduce the skill gap as much as possible. There's assist options to make you automatically slide and even turn then accelerate, cars at the back of the pack will go faster than those at the front, and they get better items to help them catch up. This means that while the new player is still unlikely to beat someone who knows the game really well, they at least have a chance to stay in the mix and kind of recover from mistakes. Since Modern Warfare in 2007, Call of Duty has sat in a particularly unusual place. Not only does it have punishing one-shot deaths with sniper rifles and obscure rules regarding movement and aiming just like Counter-Strike does, but in multiplayer modes it actually does the opposite of Mario Kart and rewards the players that are doing well with kill streaks, reinforcing their lead and making it harder for the trading players to catch up. I remember the first days we were playing Modern Warfare, and we were all incredulous at how easy it was to completely wipe the enemy team out if you just managed to get an airstrike. I think you needed like 5 kills to get an airstrike, so you could kind of just camp around a corner or something, get those 5 kills pretty easily, then get 2 kills with the airstrike, that would give you the attack helicopter, and then the game was basically over because that would just let you completely dominate the map. It felt absolutely ridiculous, and if you were on the other team, if an enemy player managed to get those 5 kills and get the airstrike, and then get the attack helicopter, it just felt like it was completely hopeless. There was no way for you to get back in the game. It just stopped games dead. I remember me and my friends talking about this and sort of saying, oh, there's no way they'll keep this going. There's no way this will come back in future games because it's just absolutely ridiculous. But people loved it, and now it's become kind of an important part of Call of Duty. Since 2007, while the Call of Duty series has dabbled with things like death streaks to help people get back into the game, they have consistently gone down that route of rewarding the most able players with more advantages and then punishing people who make mistakes absolutely brutally. And this philosophy's been reflected in the marketing too. Activision celebrate high-skill players. They organise and support competitive COD leagues and tournaments. They retweet clips of players doing incredible things and use the kind of languages that kind of focuses on there being a big skill gap, like talking about pros or making jokes about Christmas noobs. All of this has filtered back into the player base and the online Call of Duty community. Look anywhere on Twitter, Reddit, YouTube videos, TikTok, and you'll see clips of high-level play or players boasting about their insanely high kill-death ratios. Or, they just say it casually. They'll just be like, well, I've only got a KD of 3.5, I know that makes me average. Or they'll be talking about how many nukes they've managed to get or how many Warzone matches they win and the crazy streaks they've managed to get to. And they post all of this alongside other posts by the same players complaining about broken metas and playstyles they don't like and how terrible the COD servers are and how unplayable the game is because of cheaters. Anyone with a 1 kill death or below is just dismissed as being trash. Depending on where you look, sometimes it's like, oh, anyone with less than a 2 kill death is a noob or they're casual, and their opinion doesn't matter because they're not good enough at the game to keep up. I was literally told by Charlie Intel, one of the biggest sort of Call of Duty news organizations, that my opinion didn't matter. They didn't need to reflect that when they were talking about what the Call of Duty community thinks, because I'm just a casual. There's an elitism based on skill where everybody wants to see themselves as being good at Call of Duty, and then anyone who's better than them is a no-lifing sweat or a tryhard, and anyone worse than them is a bot or they're casual or they're a noob. Apparently they're the only ones playing the game to the exact right level. And this sentiment loops back into the game design. So while Modern Warfare 2's first public test experimented with making the game a little bit more intuitive, we're talking about the 2022 Modern Warfare 2 by the way, they tried to make the game a bit more intuitive. They had things like loud footsteps making up for having less information on the minimap, high recoil weapons, attachments with significant downsides so basic weapons could still be used, and the removal of things like slide cancelling. And a very vocal part of the community, the more sort of hardcore part of the community, rallied against this. They were arguing that it reduced the skill gap too much. They said it made gunfights random and meant casual players now had a chance against the most hardcore, and that wasn't fair. They wanted to be rewarded for spending hundreds of hours practicing at the game, and they didn't like being brought down to an even playing field. As an aside, I never quite agreed with this take. I played all through the Modern Warfare 2 beta with a group of content creators of kind of varying different skill levels, but we were easily winning every match. We were running and gunning all the way. Literally, you know, we'd be playing Search and Destroy and be like, okay, this round we'll all run around with shotguns, or we'll all try running around with pistols. And we were still managing to do it. We weren't seeing the hundreds of campers that apparently infested everyone else's servers in any of the game modes. We just learned to play a new game. We adapted to it, as much as that whole adapt thing somehow became a meme. But we adapted to a new style of play and we were doing well at it, which shouldn't really be possible if apparently every gunfight was random. But Modern Warfare 2 shifted a little bit back to the standard for Call of Duty after all of those complaints. They got rid of stuff like the loud footsteps and the heavy recoil and the attachments having big downsides. They tried to push the skill gap a little bit wider. And then nobody was really happy. People who had started getting into it, like I was really enjoying it, were now getting destroyed again by the most hardcore groups, and the hardcore players found other things to complain about. They now didn't like the map design, or they didn't like the meta. Then Modern Warfare 3 came out, and it was overtly targeted at the hardcore crowd. Slide cancelling was back. That was like a big thing of the early marketing for it. It's a technique that gives you a big advantage in gunfights, it's never taught to you in game, and it appears to most normal players as a glitch. Because that's what it was. It was originally a glitch that they just kind of ended up featuring in the game. Modern Warfare 2 maps were back, the original Modern Warfare 2, so that meant people who had spent hundreds of hours learning them now had a huge advantage knowing all of the angles and routes to dominate on every map. Weapons had barely any recoil and huge magazines. Attachments had basically no downsides. So now fast movement and quick reflexes were completely rewarded without any kind of downsides or things getting in the way of your skill sort of leading directly to success. The hardcore players got everything they wanted. They even got the Kar 98 back in the most recent season to reward really fast accuracy and allow absolutely no room for mistakes. I played a bit of multiplayer today and I didn't realize quite how much the Kar 98 has completely dominated multiplayer now. You're just constantly getting one shot. It feels like you're playing hardcore or something. So the hardcore players got what they wanted. They got a Call of Duty with possibly the highest skill gap so far. And as far as I can tell from the available public information, it's one of the worst performing Call of Duty games to date. Obviously, we don't have lots of information like the exact sales numbers for different territories and different platforms and things like that, but the things we do have all kind of paint a disappointing picture for Modern Warfare 3. Their victory lap graphic, you know, the thing that they post just after the game comes out, like a few weeks later, where they normally talk about, hey, it's sold the most copies ever, or it's got the most concurrent players ever, or things like that. Instead focused on things like MWZ was the most played third mode in a Modern Warfare game to date, or the most time was spent per player in the campaign in a Call of Duty game. So it wasn't the best-selling game of the year or anything like that. And in fact, from the NPDs, we at least know it wasn't the best-selling game in America. Out of the previous 15 years to that game coming out, Call of Duty had been the best-selling game in 13 years of them. And normally, The previous Call of Duty game was the second best-selling one in every year. The only two times it had been beaten were both by Rockstar with Grand Theft Auto 5 and Red Dead Redemption 2, which is, kind of understandable. Last year, Call of Duty was beaten by Hogwarts Legacy. On Steam charts, while I know that's a bad way to judge the popularity of a game, it's got Warzone wrapped into it and it also probably has the lowest player count of any platform, but Modern Warfare 2 peaked at 488,000 players, while Modern Warfare 3 peaked at 190,000 players, way less than half. The reason for this, to me at least, seems simple. The hardcore group of Call of Duty players that are extremely vocal in content creation and on social media have been playing these games for years, decades in some cases, and they're completely dedicated to just this one game series, and they finally have a game that fits their preferences for an incredibly high skill gap. All the normal players, who form the vast majority of players and aren't anywhere near the same skill level because maybe they haven't played for that long, or they play lots of other games, or they just don't care that much, they just can't compete. A normal player will load up a match of Warzone right now, maybe struggle through and get a kill at the start due to the RNG of hot drops, and then they'll quickly get blasted out of the game by somebody who's got meta guns, crazy movement, amazing map awareness, and lightning fast reflexes. They won't stand a chance in that gunfight, and then they'll go to the gulag and get destroyed by someone who's been watching videos on how to perfect that particular gulag, making use of head glitches so they give themselves the biggest advantage possible. Then the normal player will just turn off the game and play something else. Like, why wouldn't you? Games are a recreational thing for the vast majority of people. It's a way to unwind or just hang out with their friends. Losing constantly and getting completely outplayed consistently just isn't fun. And thankfully, there's a bunch of other games to choose from, so they'll just go play something else. Then over time, the average skill level of players will keep on rising as new and worse performing players just quit the game and the most hardcore players stick with it, until eventually some of those hardcore players find themselves on the wrong side of the average level. And then suddenly they're not having as much fun either because they're losing all the time, although they're more likely to probably blame it on things like cheats or the meta or the network or something like that, because how could they possibly be bad at the game? They're better than all of their friends. And then they quit and that average skill level keeps going up, until eventually only a tiny hardcore community remain. Of course, the response to this is usually, well, they should just get better like I did. I started off getting destroyed in Modern Warfare 2007, but I stuck with it and now I'm good. They can just do that. But there's a number of problems there. Number one, you learned back when everybody was learning. The skill gap was much smaller back then in the original Modern Warfare and Modern Warfare 2 and Black Ops 2. There just wasn't enough time for people to have got as good at the game as they are now. And there wasn't the hundreds of YouTube guides on how to exploit every single glitch and meta imbalance. There wasn't the gap in hardware capabilities and crossplay, with some people having crazy expensive setups and amazing controllers going up against people on the most basic platform that's capable of playing the game. Call of Duty's been going for 20 years. Some people who try to get into the game right now will be competing against people who have been playing it since before they were born. And the second point is, you were probably young when you went through that whole process of learning the game. It's not just that it's easier to learn new things when you're young, or that you care more about getting good at a video game when you're young, which is definitely true, but it's also that this might have been one of your first video games. If you grew up at the same time as the development of twin-stick FPS games, like Call of Duty, you had the ideal learning curve to get used to them, because when they were brand new, they were new to you, and that was the only games that you knew how to play. That was the only thing that you learned to play. And as they've slowly got more complex, you've been able to play each one and learn through it over the years. Someone who's really old, like me, had to get used to playing games without analog sticks at all, using joypads or using the big old joysticks that were nothing like that. And we had to learn to adapt to the dual stick FPS games when they came out. And young people today are suddenly faced with an incredibly complex controller that they need to learn all at once. If you give someone who hasn't played games before an Xbox controller or a PlayStation controller, think of how many buttons there are on the face of it, on the top of it. You've got the two analog sticks that you need to use at the same time that you can also click in and use as buttons. There's things like learning what aim sensitivity is, what an aim response curve is, dead zones. There's such a huge amount to learn that you've probably learned over many, many years. And it's kind of unreasonable to expect someone to just learn all of that at once while not enjoying the game they're playing. And the third point on this is probably the biggest one, that most people just don't care about being good at Call of Duty. If they play it and they're bad at it, they'll just play something else. There's no inherent benefit to your life of being good at Call of Duty other than making that particular game more fun to play. If you don't play it, it doesn't affect you at all. The thought of spending dozens or hundreds of hours on improving your skills at a game you might not really care about would just seem absolutely ridiculous to most people. And regardless of what anyone says, the more people playing Call of Duty, the better. The more people that play Call of Duty, if you enjoy playing Call of Duty, you want there to be a bigger audience, because that means more people to play against, that means more effective, things like skill-based matchmaking and connection matchmaking and all of that kind of stuff, more investment in the games. It's just a good thing all round, so you shouldn't want new people to be put off playing the game. So what's the solution? How can Call of Duty still attract new players while also keeping the vast majority of normal players happy and still provide something for the most hardcore? They just need to lower the skill gap. If a new or bad player has a chance against even the best players, they're more likely to stick around. If you can sometimes get a lucky win or a great kill streak, you're more likely to have a good time. The most hardcore will probably fume that their dedication isn't being rewarded, but honestly, who cares? It's a video game. They're statistically a tiny part of the audience, so if they quit playing, which we both know they won't, it doesn't really matter. There's plenty of ways they could do this with Black Ops 6, the next Call of Duty game to come out. First of all, they should remove things like head glitches and slide cancelling. Bullets should come out of your gun, and sliding should be a clumsy thing to recover from. That would be much more intuitive. It would make maps much easier to read for new players, because they'd be able to see, okay, that will work as cover because I can hide behind it but still stick my gun out from the side of it or above it or something like that. And getting rid of slide cancelling would make the more obvious features of the movement system, like the new omnidirection diving, way more useful and common. I'm a bit worried that if slide cancelling is still in the game, people just won't use the omnidirection because it will still be faster to slide around a corner and then immediately be able to get up and start shooting, instead of using the diving at all. And we've seen that before in Call of Duty games where they add some kind of cool new movement system and nobody ever uses it. Secondly, they need to make all the guns much worse and have less of them. The current gunsmith is basically impossible to understand without huge amounts of testing or being told what to use by the people that do that testing, like True Game Data or JGOD. If the guns were simpler and the basic versions of the guns were viable, kind of like they were in Modern Warfare 2 originally, people who didn't want to deeply engage in the system wouldn't need to. They could just grab a gun that looks good and go with it. Having high recoil guns with unpredictable recoil make it impossible to learn the patterns, so that means even if someone gets a drop on you and they're a better shot than you, they're not necessarily 100% gonna win that gunfight, which means there's a chance, a little bit of RNG, a chance for you to win. And if all the attachments have significant downsides, that would still mean that you could customize your gun to suit your playstyle a bit, but it would be at the cost of something else. So if you didn't use any attachments, you wouldn't be at a big disadvantage. So for example, you can have a grip that reduces recoil, but then also massively lowers ADS speed, or a larger magazine could lead to more recoil or a really long reload time. I think more obvious pros and cons would be useful too. None of this like plus 5% reduced ADS sway and flinch. Just have a set of bonuses in a pool that are easy to understand, and then have each attachment pick a couple from that pool. So if it says it reduces recoil, you know how much it reduces recoil because all the attachments that say they reduce recoil would do the same thing. This is kind of how the blackout attachments worked, where you would just find a compensator and you knew what a compensator did because you used the same compensator on all of the guns that it would fit on. It just worked and it was great. It was super easy to understand. You knew if you had a gun that had high recoil, you were like, oh, I should probably put a compensator on that. Means I won't be able to use a suppressor, but being able to have less recoil is more important to me. Third, bring back death streaks and replace kill streaks with score streaks. I think they've used score streaks kind of in general with the Black Ops games. I'm not sure with Black Ops 6 which way they're going, whether you'll be able to choose score streaks or kill streaks, or they'll just force one or the other. But I think they should just get rid of kill streaks and just have score streaks. Death streaks can be super useful to give players that are struggling a bit of a boost, maybe give them a bit of armor or faster speed, and score streaks encourage objective play over everything else. Also, it'd be great if they tried to avoid score streaks that completely dominate a match. That'd be great too. For Warzone, I think they should just lower the player count, and adding bots would be a big help. That way normal players are still likely to get a bunch of kills, because a bunch of them will be on bots, and the bots don't mind dying with no kills, they don't care. And everyone is more likely to win a match if there's a reduced player count, and everyone's more likely to have a good time. Removing things like one-shot deaths and loadouts will probably help too. If there's a little bit more RNG in terms of what weapons you have available to you, there's a few more chances for normal players to get the upper hand. Of course, all of this would make the game harder for the most hardcore players. But then surely they're up for a challenge, so they should embrace it. Plus, even with games with the smallest skill gaps like Mario Kart, there's still a huge difference between a seasoned Mario Kart player and someone who's new. Your little cousin isn't likely to beat you at Mario Kart, but at least they can have some fun before you win. And every once in a while, they might win. And is that really such a bad thing?